Hello, gamers. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time for Lowtech to show you what it's made of. And it's going to do it in the most low-tech way possible. With big guns. Because me like big gun. Big gun shoot good, kill enemy. Much like Big Rock, but in space. Because we could mess around with carriers. We could run legions and moras, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go all in on the most stereotypically low-tech thing you could do. Just shoot enemy with big cannon, and then they die. And it's going to work. Let's start with the flagship and break this down. There's definitely a few ways that you can build onslaughts that work. The one that I always gravitate towards is the cryoblaster. Because this thing is just so good. It's so very, very good. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely other ways you can build this ship. I've seen X-modded magazines with triple Storm Needler, because it not only boosts the TPCs, but now the Storm Needlers get that boost, and I've seen that be pretty effective. But Cryoblaster, and that's my entire argument. It's kind of hard to beat that argument, though, because the insane amount of DPS this has against Hull just gives you so much more reliability in actually finishing off your target. The problem, of course, is Cryoblaster only has 600 range, so it gets outranged by everything else. How do you solve this? Well, it's a ballistic rangefinder, of course. It's going to give it a plus 200, so now it's 800 range. But then, if you're spending 25 on a ballistic rangefinder, you're not going to do that for just one weapon, so now you want to slap on a bunch of railguns so that they can also benefit from it. And now that you've got fragmentation damage in your medium slot, and a bunch of kinetic damage in your small slots, now you're kind of pigeonholed into putting like a high explosive weapon here. A Hephaestus assault gun would be preferable most of the time, but in this case we really don't have a lot of extra flux or extra ordnance points to play around with. And as long as it's punching holes in the armor, most of the DPS is going to come from the Cryoblaster anyways. Like, yes, there's a big argument between which is better, Hellbore or Hephaestus assault gun. I think after the buffs the Hephaestus assault gun has gotten, that it's generally better. Even though this has much less requirements to get it running, lower ordnance points, lower flux, and it's got higher hit strength, the Hephaestus assault gun having vastly superior accuracy, on top of having much higher DPS against Hull, has generally made it better. But in this fleet I'm using a little bit of both, because, well, as much as I'd like to use the Hephaestus assault gun everywhere, sometimes you just can't afford to, and the Hellbore, it's going to fit right in there. So in this case, I was not really planning on going all pylons. I was actually thinking about using missiles, but then I realized after a while that once I got the guns set up the way that I want them, and I've got all the flux filled out, I don't actually have enough ordnance points to go with like missile racks or anything. So I just started putting pylons on everything. And then I looked back and said to myself, that's 26 pylons. That's a lot. But to be fair, I think it works with the low-tech fleets anyways, because one thing low-tech is lacking is EMP damage. And having 26 pylons in your fleet supplies a decent amount of EMP damage. Yeah, I think Devastators are pretty good, because we've already used up all of these other slots. We don't have room for Vulcans. And sure, we've got 4 flat cannons, but those on their own are not going to... They're not good enough. Like the main... Like if you have a torpedo coming in from the front, you can block it with your shields. If it's coming in from the side, sometimes your shields can't deploy in time, or it's coming from an angle they can't reach. And these Devastators will take out torpedoes. They'll take out waves of flash bombers. They do pretty good. And in fact, they're also pretty good at taking out frigates with these railguns. Like the railguns snipe the shields, and then this thing just scatters a bunch of high explosive damage everywhere, and some of them are going to get past. It's been pretty effective. Over here, advanced turret gyros. S-modded is really good on capitals. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Getting more scaling up damage against smaller and smaller ships is pretty good. And then 25% bonus damage to missiles and fighters helps make your point defense more effective. And point defense is a lot more important on low-tech ships than it is on high-tech ships. Right? If you're reliant more on your armor, then torpedoes are more of an issue. Right? You know, a Paragon can take a torpedo, and it's not the end of the world, right? It's, you know, it's still got amazing shields. This thing really doesn't. So that torpedo is a much bigger deal. I've also got a ton of hull, because I got damage control and reinforced bulkheads. Originally, I actually had combat endurance as well for that repair, and I am definitely missing the repair. I'm feeling the loss. But what I realized is that after picking out all of my officer skills, none of them got combat endurance. Like 0. It was just too low of a priority compared to the other skills that I wanted. And so that meant I could drop combat endurance and get crew training instead, and that would just give the fleet 100% combat readiness across the board while skipping over combat endurance. Now, it's a little bit sad that I don't get to get that sweet 8% off of cybernetic augmentation by missing out on that one elite skill over here. But here's the thing. This is giving 5% stats, this is giving 1% stats, and if you've got a brain as large as mine, you've probably noticed 5 is bigger than 1. So as sad as it is, it's worth it. Just for that little bit of extra juice for the fleet. Now this is one of the cases where I'm actually going into the industry tree instead of going all in on leadership. In fact, I was trying to avoid leadership entirely until I had that realization that I could swap this for this and that it would just be basically better. But Lowtech has a few problems, right? Because where other ships might rely on shields more, relying on your hull and armor means that you have to pay extra supplies to repair that damage. On top of that, your Lowtech ships are less fuel efficient, and when you take hull damage, you're going to lose crew. So that's supplies that you're going to run out of more, that's crew that you're going to run out of more, and that's fuel you're going to run out of more. It's just more expensive. So the industry tree, with field repairs giving us some percentage of free hull and armor repair, helps mitigate that supply cost. And then containment procedures reduces your fuel consumption and crew losses across the board. So these two skills combined mitigate the exact issues that you have with a low-tech fleet. And then on top of that, hull restoration plus field repairs means that you can afford to lose ships in combat and then just pick them back up afterwards like nothing happened. And I'm taking advantage of that with this fleet, but we'll get to that in a second. Of course, also, if you're piloting an onslaught, both of these skills are amazing. So when you're trying to make a low-tech fleet, industry becomes a lot more tempting than it would be for other types of fleets. Yeah, it's kind of crew training, but also the combat effect is basically crew training, but instead of being a tier 1 skill, it's a tier 5 skill. But then on top of that, it's got a really amazing a logistics bonus by removing demods. And I've got electronic warfare again, because it's really good, and the alternative is to put safety overrides on your frigates, which feels cheap to me. I don't like doing that. You're either running Omens, or other high-tech ships, but probably Omens, or you're putting safety overrides, or maybe you're running phase ships. And you know, phase ships are definitely an option. You could get phase call tuning instead of this, and use those to capture the points. But since we're not in leadership, we're not getting either of these skills for our frigates anyways. So investing in phase ships, it would be a bit awkward, because you're not getting that full value out of them. So I've opted to go with electronic warfare. Yeah, I think that's all I really need to say about this. Like, helmsmanship and impact mitigation. Like, yeah, I could get ballistic mastery, but I think it's a lower priority compared to the other options. Like, there's a decent amount of the damage coming from an onslaught that's not ballistic, between the cryoblaster and the 2 thermal pulse cannons that are built in. There's a decent amount that's not coming from that. So target analysis is going to be a priority in terms of damage, and then I want the maneuverability from impact mitigation and helmsmanship, and then also I want more hull durability, and the fact that the elite bonus lets you repair during combat. Like I want all of these more than I want this. And while missile specialization would be nice, it's a nice little boost to the pylons, but not enough for me to think that that's worth it. Now, what I was talking about with taking advantage of losses is all of these lashers here that have no officers. We expect many of them to die. Some of you may die, but that's a sacrifice I am willing to make. Because they're just a few frigates. They can die, and I can pick them up, and then what's the cost going to be? It's going to be very low. I mean, some percentage is automatically getting repaired. The crew losses are going to be minimal because of this. Any demods are not an issue because of this. And they're already frigates in the first place, so losing them is, even without these skills, losing them is pretty affordable. But what this lets us do is it lets us put all of our officers into these bigger ships, and then have these frigates, which can now actually effectively capture the points with electronic warfare. I'm aware of the irony of a low-tech fleet being good at electronic warfare, but it definitely works here, especially since going up to 15 ships, which you would never have enough officers for, it kind of synergizes with electronic warfare even better, because fielding 15 ships means we're getting more out of it in terms of for the ECM. This is 15% plus the 1 from ourselves, so 16% ECM. Not bad for a quote-unquote low-tech fleet. Now the Dominators. How do you make these damn things work against Remnants? They've just got too many problems. They're easily flanked, and then they don't have the speed to back off if they're being attacked by a Radiant. They're just a liability, right? Well, I think I've managed to crack the code with these things. There's a few things we have to do here to mitigate all of their weaknesses. Not completely, of course. It's not like you can sleepwalk through this fight. You're going to have to pilot your onslaught pretty aggressively and be willing to trade in a lot of hull to take out the enemy Radiant as fast as you can. But as long as you're willing to do that, and the enemy isn't fielding like 4 Radiants, as long as it's like 1 or 2 should not be a problem. Once they get up to 3 or 4, then you would probably need the extra repair from this to actually have enough endurance to take on all 4 in a sequence. But as long as you're not doing anything too crazy like that, then you can take them out with your onslaught, and these guys can survive pretty much anything else. So maybe I should actually strip it down and then walk through all of the things. So, it's going to get flanked. How do we fix this? Well, one way to fix it is to give it more maneuverability, helmsmanship, and elite impact mitigation. You want impact mitigation anyways because it's got good armor. So putting those two together, now it can turn faster. Okay, next thing, let's put a bunch of railguns like this so that they've got wide firing arcs. Then we even get Omni shields, because this is a similar thing to a lot of other ships where their main guns are fixed to the front. You don't want it wiggling around too much to try and catch things with that frontal shield. Instead, giving it Omni shields is going to let it focus fire on whatever it actually needs to kill, independent of the shield's facing. Now, the small shield arc would be a problem on other ships, but in the Dominator's case, it's got such amazing armor and hull that letting a few shots slip by because your shield arc is too small is actually fine. Like, it's mostly using the shield to flicker on and catch high explosive shots. It's not using it as its main defensive tool. So the small arc is actually a non-issue, and trading that in to get a nice Omni shield that can point in any direction, absolutely worth it. Of course, with all these railguns, ballistic rangefinder to maximize the range, going ballistic mastery and gunnery implants, so it can shoot from a long range. Range is good. That's never going to change. Range gets... It's already fine in the early game, but the later the game goes, the better range gets. And then it really needs S-modded flux distributor and ordnance expertise to actually fire all of these guns, because, I mean, look at that flux. Now, not all of the guns are going to be firing. Like, some of these arcs don't really overlap. Like, these kinds are interesting because the side ones can take on flanking frigates, but if there's a big ship in front of it, well, the ship's shield arc is not going to be wide enough that as long as it's facing straight at it, it can actually fire all 5 railguns, if it needs to. But the way that I've set up the firing groups is I've split the Hephaestus Assault Gun on one side, the Hellborn on another side, then the Pylons, then the left railguns, then the center railgun, then the right railgun, and then all of the point defense. It doesn't do this by default. The default looks like this. I don't like this, so I'm going to cancel that. I like this setup. This seems to work well for the AI. We've maximized the armor, and there's not too many hull mods on this one. It's not spamming hull mods the way that this guy is. I mean, look at all of this. That's a lot. But this, I mean, it's really simple. It's kinetics in the turrets, high explosive in these slots, and then we try to use flak cannons to make up for the lack of frontal point defense. Vulcans around the back. Now, there's definitely some interesting builds you can experiment with going, say, elite ballistic mass, or no, elite point defense, and then slapping a lot of light machine guns around it, because now they have long enough range that they can actually shoot at enemy frigates flanking it. At the same time, you can get integrated point defense AI, plus the bonus damage from point defense. That's 100% bonus damage to missiles between those two things. That goes a long way towards fixing the issue light machine guns have, which is just not having enough DPS to actually work as point defense. So with those two things together, you've got all these machine guns that both work as point defense and shoot at enemy frigates. I've just decided not to do that. In this case, I'm going with the railgun plan. And so far it works pretty well. And then we've got the lashers. They don't have officers, but they do have a few things going for them. They've got 100% combat readiness, a couple of S mods, and they've got flux regulation letting me max this out. A single railgun might not seem like a much, but it's a single railgun with an accelerated ammo feeder. And as it turns out, for taking on enemy frigates, that's pretty good. Just maxing out the flux stats, hardened shields, it's kind of cosplaying as a high-tech ship with this for more speed and this for better shields. Like, no armor investment is really going to be worth it here. So this is the main gun. This does the kinetic damage, maximize the flux stats, maximize those shields so it can have a decent chance of surviving. The light mortars are mostly just slot filler. At the very least, they do help it kill larger ships. Like, it's going to support our bigger ships. So, you know, it doesn't, like, if it's attacking a larger ship, it doesn't need to get through the shields by itself. And if it's attacking a smaller ship, the railgun should do the job just fine. These things are pretty cool. And then the other onslaught. This one, it's got the same guns, but because the officer doesn't have all of the skills that my player character has, like, I didn't have room for damage control. I went and prioritized helmsmanship and impact mitigation so that it can actually get around the battlefield. Like, it doesn't matter how strong your onslaught is. If it kills, like, a few guys over at a capture point, and then it has to cross the map to go actually contribute to the battle again, during that travel time, it's not doing anything. So we want to minimize that travel time by getting up its maneuverability and getting up its speed. On top of that, gunnery implants, target analysis, ordnance expertise, did the best that I could. But without damage control, I figured it was better to give it hardened shields and a bit more caps, rather than giving it reinforced bulkheads. And so far this has worked, especially with Omni Shields. Once again, it's a similar story to the Dominator. Small shield arc doesn't really matter that much. It's mostly using it to catch any shots that would threaten its armor, or like torpedoes. And so it just needs to be able to flicker it in the right direction. And the small shield arc is not really an issue for that. I don't think I mentioned automated repair unit earlier, but S-modding this is just really good. 75% faster repair, well, 75% reduced repair time, and in case it overloads, reduced overload time. I mean, that shouldn't really be an issue, but just in case. And then we get to the manticores, which used to be pretty good at operating independently, and then they gave Brilliant's plasma burn, and they introduced the Nova, and suddenly they were a lot more vulnerable, because now they were just barely had enough speed and shields that they could keep their distance from anything that was threatening. But now, with these ships all having forward momentum, they're just not quite fast enough to do it. But luckily, in the same patch that made them not as viable by themselves, we got escort package. So they don't need to operate by themselves. You have them operate as escorts, and they're one of my favorite ships to put as escorts. Ballistic rangefinder, railguns, Hephaestus assault gun. They got long-range weapons. You stack on the gunnery implants. You stack on the ballistic mastery. It is pretty good. They're definitely overfluxed, and there's definitely an argument to be made of going with the Hellbore. But my experience has been, it manages its flux pretty well. Like, it can afford to build up soft flux. So, trading out the ability to, giving it overfluxed weaponry has been worth it in exchange for better accuracy. Because as an escort, it does need to take out frigates, and the Hellbore is just not cut out for it. But a Hephaestus assault gun is cut out for it. It's pretty good at that. So this has been the best setup. And in fact, this is one of the rare cases where I think it's worth putting an elite skill into ordnance expertise. Normally that elite bonus is just not very good on officers. But because everything else is already taken up. You're just so... The budget is so tight that you really can't afford to get any capacitors. So getting that extra 1,100 flux capacity, it's actually kind of worth it over the other options. It's very rare that I would pick Elite Ordnance Expertise over any other elite skill, but this is the one case where I think it's worth it. And then with the S-mod bonus on this, giving it extra shield durability, it can actually absorb a few shots. Now, what's funny is that a lot of these ships actually have I didn't coordinate this on purpose, but they have very similar choices of skills. They all have helmsmanship, they all have gunnery implants, they all have ordnance expertise. What does that say about Lowtech? That you want to solve the mobility issues, you want to solve the low flux, and more range is more good. And then for these last two skills, it's a choice between 3. Impact mitigation, ballistic mastery, and target analysis. For the slower ships with more armor, impact mitigation and getting the elite bonus was a no-brainer. For the manticore, it doesn't really need that. It doesn't have great armor, it's already got enough mobility, so instead I can grab both target analysis and ballistic mastery. And then for the onslaught, it's the same thing as I said earlier. It's got a decent chunk of its damage not even coming from ballistics, so I prioritize target analysis over ballistic mastery. Whereas for the dominator, I prioritize ballistic mastery so that it would have, because it's almost entirely ballistics aside from the pylons, and that extra projectile speed is going to make it a lot more effective at killing things, especially small things that might be flanking it, which would normally be an issue. So, I think that covers basically everything I need to know preemptively. Let's show how it works in combat. 224, that's pretty big. Alright, let's see. I'm going to send 2 of you to the far point, and you can see this path is actually close enough to this point that with electronic warfare it's going to capture it. This one isn't. It's actually a little too far. This setup, by the way, is my least favorite. The one where it's like 2 on each side. I much prefer the different diamond shapes that we get, like the symmetrical diamond and the lazy rhombus. Those 2 shapes. A lot more fun. For this map, it would be kind of nice if there was like a 5th one in the middle, but now you've got 5 instead of 4, and maybe that ruins the game balance in some way. I don't know. Anyways, I just don't like squares. All my homies hate the squares. So that's not going to capture this. It's a little too far. So we'll just do it manually. So we'll set it up like that and hit the burn drive. I did also try like using defense orders and rally point orders to just have them in a big line and try and do things that way, which like it works kind of, but also not really. Like, as long as they actually support each other and, like, work together to focus down targets, they're doing fine. But a lot of the time, there's too much variability in combat, and that doesn't end up really happening. Okay, so I actually want to order you to stay here, because as long, like, it doesn't need to actually win too much against the enemy frigates. As long as it stays in the vicinity, then electronic warfare will prevent them from capturing that from us. Because I do want to get enough that I can actually deploy these last 2 manticores. And this one will escort me. When I get my chance to deploy the next 2, they're going to escort the other guy. Let's burn forward. Okay, yeah, so this guy is going to come here. He's going to hold them off. And it'll be hunky-dory. Okay, so this is definitely where their main fleet is. In which case, I'm going to order you guys to come back as escorts. Having the lashers act as escorts massively improves the survivability of the lashers. The ones that operate independently are generally going to get themselves killed. But as I said, we're prepared for that. That's a sacrifice we're willing to make. There we go. Got that captured. Can deploy these 2. You guys can escort there, and you 2 can have you act as an escort here, you act as an escort here. It makes it a little bit harder to flank the dominators, and it helps those lashers survive. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You know, compared to like a Pegasus or a Paragon, I do believe that the Onslaught requires a bit more piloting skill. You really need to be able to read into a situation for when to push and when not to push. Because if you're not aggressive enough, you're going to run into issues. But if you're too aggressive, you'll also run into issues. And you don't really have the mobility to course correct once you commit to something. Maybe not the best use of your time, but I'm going to leave it. You don't exactly have a lot of command points to work with. Man, there's so much ordnance. I'm starting to get the latency. Uh-oh. Starting to get a little bit of a frame rate drop there. Kill. Yeah, it's got tachyon lances, which are... like, beam weapons like tachyon lances are a good reason not to go with shield shunt. Even though I'm not going to use the shields too much during the battle, just because the weapons on this thing build up way too much soft flux, and unlike the AI, I don't have the skill to flicker them on, like different weapon groups on and off repeatedly throughout a battle to actually manage the flux. So most of the time my flux bar is going to be filled up with soft flux, which means I'm not going to get to use my shields too much. And that, on the surface, makes it seem like shield shunt would be better. Just get the extra armor and don't worry about the shields. But for things like tachyon lances, the ability to just flicker your shields on, block the incoming volley, and then immediately vent all the flux while the tachyon lances are on cooldown. Like, just having the option to do that is worth so much. It's worth more than just having those shield shunts. Heh. You're in trouble. Maybe... nah, I'm just gonna leave you. If you die, you die. So be it. The wall of ordnance. And there's the pylons. Yeah, we're having a good day. Ow. Stop that. No. You're a jerk. Alright. It is really running. Alright, I'll give it some space. I'll let it run away. Let it think it's escaped. But what he doesn't know is that I'm going to kill it. Alright, after the next tachyon launch... okay, now I bent. Yeah, breach is coming in, that's fine. I'll let the manticore take care of the little guy behind me. Yep, take care of that. Vent again. Yeah, see? The Devastator took care of that. You son of a bitch, you are really staying at max range. You're making my life so damn difficult. Man, imagine if this thing had systems expertise. I used to think that they could get it, but as far as I'm aware now, Radiants are not allowed to get systems expertise. Because, well, for good reason. Because if this thing had it, it would be so much more of a pain to actually finish this off. There we go. And you can see why I would really want the repair from combat endurance. Being able to recover all of that lost hull would be fantastic. But as it stands, now that the Radiant's off the field, we should be fine. Honestly, I can probably autopilot through the rest of this fight and actually get a good look at the Dominators doing their thing. Look at all that beautiful ordnance. And I know some people are going to be very upset that I don't have expanded magazines, but I think for this build, it's just not necessary. You've got enough soft flux build up as it is. And while TPCs are really good, it's just not worth it. Look at all those pylons. Simply gorgeous. I'm like the battlefield doctor. I go around and I cure the enemies of living. Or at least that's what I would say if they were human. Well, I guess I can cure them of existing. I mean, they exist in some capacity. And speaking of doctors, somebody apparently thinks that I sound like House MD from the show House MD. Which is a funny comment because I did make a recording of me trying to voice that one meme about the show. That's like basically every episode of House MD. It's like, House, we need to cure this patient. Well, did you try the medicine drug? Oh, I did try the medicine drug. Only stupid doctors try the medicine drug. You are stupid. I gave the patient the stupid drug. And then, of course, House says his classic line, you are a black man. Which Foreman is just completely unable to handle. He just... The very fact that House points out that he is black just completely vexes him. He is simply stun-locked, you might say, by this fact. It's a very funny meme, I promise. Is there much else to do here? No, I think I'm just going to charge forward recklessly. See, look at that. Devastator just killed a frigate. Beautiful. Okay, the AI is, let's block a few more shots here. Let's block those plasma cannon shots, instead of taking more hull damage. There we go. Now we can autopilot. You should be fine. Man, I should probably turn on detailed combat results for this kind of thing, because it would demonstrate just how much hull damage the Cryoblaster does. It gets ridiculous numbers. It's so important for actually finishing off your targets once you get them. Once you strip off, once you dealt with their shields, you stripped off the armor, Cryoblaster is your #1 friend for finishing things off. Well, the only real competitor for that would be the Auto Lances with S-modded expanded magazines. Those are also very good at finishing off targets, and they also have the advantage of having, being beams with 1,000 range. They instantly strike the target, and they have more range. Cryoblasters are going to have significantly better DPS, but then it's a trade-off between the better DPS versus the better accuracy. And so both of them end up being pretty good. Yes, as you can see. Okay, I don't know why it's turning to the right when the enemy is right here. This is strange. This is very strange. Ah, yes, the Lashers are running out of combat readiness, so we lost half of them. And this is the quintessential Lowtech experience. I'll let you guys retreat and tell everyone else to full assault. There we go. Okay, get out of the way. Move. There we go. Finish him off with the railguns. Yeah, I think I'm going to cut it off here. Bye.